The Obama administration announced retaliatory actions against Russia today for its efforts to influence the presidential election with its cyber attacks. The White House announced sanctions against Russia's two leading intelligence services and three companies that allegedly supported Russian cyber attacks. Four top officers at the Russian military intelligence unit, GRU, were also personally sanctioned. The State Department announced it was expelling 35 Russian intelligence operatives from the United States, ordering them to leave the United States within 72 hours, and closing two Russian-owned diplomatic facilities in the United States that it said were used for Russian intelligence activities. On a call today with reporters, the Obama administration also said covert actions were being taken against Russia. According to the New York Times, taken together, the actions amount to the strongest American response ever taken to a state-sponsored cyber attack aimed at the United States. A spokesperson for Russia's foreign ministry said in a Facebook post that Russia will retaliate, quote, official statements, countermeasures, and lots of other things will follow tomorrow. President Obama said this about today's actions. All Americans should be alarmed by Russia's actions. In October, my administration publicized our assessment that Russia took actions intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. These data theft and disclosure activities could only have been directed by the highest levels of the Russian government. Moreover, our diplomats have experienced an unacceptable level of harassment in Moscow by Russian security services and police over the last year. Such activities have consequences. Donald Trump released this statement today. It's time for our country to move on to bigger and better things. Nevertheless, in the interest of our country and its great people, I will meet with leaders of the intelligence community next week in order to be updated on the facts of this situation. So Donald Trump doesn't seem to think this is a big deal. We should just move on from it. But he's willing to find some time to discuss it next week with intelligence officials. This is the same Donald Trump who had time yesterday to hang with Don King instead of talking to intelligence officials about a cyber attack by Russia on the United States. We don't yet know exactly how Donald Trump will spend his day tomorrow instead of meeting with intelligence officials about Russian cyber attacks on the United States. We will have to wait and see how much time Donald Trump spends tomorrow with the likes of Don King. Last night, when he was asked about the sanctions for Russian cyber attacks, Donald Trump said this.
I think we ought to get on with our lives. I think that computers have complicated lives very greatly. The whole age of computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what's going on. We have speed, we have a lot of other things, but I'm not sure you have the kind of security that you need.
Now, if we just showed you that picture of Donald Trump and Don King and then read you these words and didn't tell you which one of them said it, you'd have no idea which one of them said it. I think that computers have complicated lives very greatly. The whole age of computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what is going on. Don King or Donald Trump? Well, you know because you just saw Donald Trump say it. A senior intelligence official tells NBC News that the Trump camp was fully briefed beforehand on today's action and agreed to be briefed next week on the sensitive elements of the cyber election review. House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell both approved of President Obama's sanctions and reiterated the danger Russia poses to the United States. Paul Ryan said Russia does not share America's interests. In fact, it has consistently sought to undermine them, sowing dangerous instability around the world. While today's action by the administration is overdue, it is an appropriate way to end 8 years of failed policy with Russia. And Mitch McConnell said, the Russians are not our friends. Sanctions against the Russian intelligence services are a good initial step, however late in coming. As the next Congress reviews Russian actions against networks associated with the U.S. election, we must also work to ensure that any attack against the United States is met with an overwhelming response. Joining us now, Steve Clemons, editor-at-large at The Atlantic and an MSNBC contributor. Also with us, David Frum, senior editor for The Atlantic, and Richard Nephew, former principal deputy coordinator for sanctions policy at the State Department. He's currently a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a program director at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy. Mr. Nephew, first of all, your reaction today to these sanctions and what you expect the effect of these sanctions to be.
Well, I think these are sanctions that are long overdue, and I think that they will serve to demonstrate to the Russian government that there are consequences to these kinds of activities and these kinds of behaviors. They won't bring down the Russian economy. They won't collapse the Russian economy overnight. They're intended more for political and diplomatic demonstration effect, and also as fair warning to other governments and other elections that are coming that Russian interference is a very likely risk. So I think from that perspective, they serve the purpose that they were intended to serve today.
Steve Clemons, what about the targeting of sanctions against individuals?
Well, we did this after the invasion of Ukraine and the cutting off of Crimea. We didn't go after Russian sectors or the Russian government. We went after cronies and institutions that are around Putin, many of whom had been involved in the Sochi Olympics. So this is something we'd done before. In the past, the Russians have just laughed it off, and it has backfired in terms of Russian public opinion, who sort of saw it as a slight of their own government. But, you know, I think that when you go after the intelligence czars that they have, I think it sends an important message, as Richard just said. And I think that we need to look at the fact that, you know, right now, Donald Trump is being dragged somewhat kicking and screaming, looking at the names and people and institutions in Russia who have attacked the legitimacy of his own presidency, to tell you the truth. And I think it's important that we have names and identities and personalities that we can attach to this.
David Frum, your reaction to the sanctions?
Well, I can't imagine the Russians are too concerned about it. They've scored the goal, and now they'll serve their time in the penalty box. But the goal doesn't get unscored. The background to all of this is not what's happening in Russia; it's what's happening in the United States. The beneficiary of this hack is the next president. It seems unlikely that he's going to be very curious as to what happened or why. He will not want to delve deeper. And it is going to lead not to an international problem, but to a domestic problem. Because while the president doesn't want to delve deeper, the president-to-be, Americans should.
And Chuck Schumer today issued this statement, basically a direct challenge to Donald Trump over this, saying, I hope the incoming Trump administration, which has been far too close to Russia throughout the campaign and transition, won't think for 1 second about weakening these new sanctions or our existing regime. Both parties ought to be united in standing up to Russian interference in our elections, to their cyber attacks, their illegal annexation of Crimea, and other extra-legal interventions. Richard Nephew, if Donald Trump does want to weaken these sanctions, he presumably could do that without any public notice.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the structure of these sanctions is that they're executive. They were issued under executive order by President Obama. They can be overturned by executive order by Donald Trump. But I think, as David was just speaking to, that the real issue here is domestic, and the fact that Congress also can have a say here. And we've seen in the past that legislatures and executive branch officials just simply disagree about sanctions on a whole host of targets, whether Russia or Iran. I actually think that's the most likely scenario in the early part of 2017, that Trump may not weaken these particular sanctions. He may go after the Ukraine-related sanctions, but I think he's going to be met with a pretty firm response, not only from Democrats in Congress, but also from people in his own party.
Let's listen to someone in his own party. Let's listen to Lindsey Graham on this.
If we don't push back against Putin, Iran and China, they could hack into our systems. Today it's Democrats. Tomorrow it could be Republicans with the Iranians and the Chinese. Trump says he's going to be tough with Iran and China. He needs to be. Well, we need to show any nation what happens to them if they try to interfere in our democratic process.
David Frum, what's your sense of the Republicans in Congress on this? How many senators Republican senators do you think Lindsey Graham's actually speaking for there?
He only needs 3. If he and John McCain and one other person hold firm, they can have a lot of impact. But what I feel, I mean, and I have tremendous respect for Lindsey Graham. I think he's taking brave and correct actions here. But let's understand, we're not here talking about if this is unchecked, then next time something worse will happen. We're at the last stop on the subway line. What has actually happened is the most aggressive, unfriendly foreign power in the world, Russia, the one with which America's interests conflict the most, even more than China, has already interfered in an American election in order to install or help to install a candidate who's very friendly to Russian geopolitical interests. I don't know what worse thing there is that the Iranians could do or the Chinese could do. We're here. We face the problem now. This is not something where we have to act prophylactically against the future. We have to deal with the present. What the Russians don't want to do is to continue endlessly for its own sake to interfere in American elections. Now they're going to recoup the benefit of this interference in Syria, in Ukraine, with the destruction of NATO and the crack-up of the European Union, all of which Donald Trump takes exactly the same positions that Vladimir Putin would wish an American president to take.
And Steve, when you listen to what David just had to say about it, you can imagine the Russian calculation being whatever the price is we might have to pay for this. When we get caught, it's worth it. We're going to have the president we want.
Well, I think there are two pieces to it, and David's my colleague. I disagree with him that we're at the end of the subway line. We're at the beginning of a convulsive, sort of dark period in American history. People will not allow this to stand. You know, Donald Trump's failure to come out and condemn the Russians, though he won the election, but his failure to condemn the Russians for what they have done throws into doubt his legitimacy as a leader. That's going to be chewed up by the Congress. You know, the second piece of this is we're talking about cyber war. And as Malcolm Nance said, this is a state of war. We are going to most likely retaliate against the Russians covertly, as well as what we've just done publicly. And this is an area where there are no rules, there are no norms. It's not like the nuclear weapons where you had mutual assured destruction and deterrence. This is something that is an entirely new arena for whacking at each other, and that is now out of the bag and very hard to put back. So we're at the beginning of a new track. So I'll just add that to David.
Richard Nephew, Russia has promised retaliation for the sanctions. What retaliation would you expect?
Well, I think at a minimum, they'll probably go after some of our diplomats as well. I expect that they will seek to expel probably 35 American diplomats and accuse them of being intelligence officials. They may seek to restrict U.S. access to facilities in Russia, whether they're consulates or other facilities. So I think they'll be proportional in that regard. In terms of sanctions, I expect them to attempt to restrict access from the United States to Russian markets. They've done that with respect to Turkey after the shootdown of the jet fighter this spring. They've done that with respect to the European Union. The problem for the Russians, they don't have a whole lot of opportunity here unless they go after something really big like banks.
Richard Nephew, David Frum, Steve Clemons, thank you all for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.